Welcome to Starbound. If you're tired of AI-generated slop and want real, human storytelling, please subscribe and support this channel. My name is General G, and I'll be your narrator. Let's get into today's story. The bidding for the terrified ball of fur started at 50,000 credits, and Larson Mandel decided that was 50,000 too many. He cultivated a reputation for being a man who did not get involved. Involvement led to complications. Complications led to debts. And debts led to short, messy lifespans. He'd spent the last decade meticulously avoiding that particular outcome. But as the auctioneer's oily voice echoed through the cavernous, rust-stained hold of the black market barge anchored in the sludge-gray nebula known as the Sump, Larson's gaze kept snapping back to the glowing electro-cage. Inside, a creature the size of a house cat, all downy fluff and enormous. Liquid dark eyes trembled violently. It had no obvious fangs, no valuable pelt, no apparent purpose other than to exist and be terrified. It looked utterly, heartbreakingly scared. And something in Larson's cynical, whiskey-soaked soul decided it had been scared long enough. "Going once to the Primordial Jackal Syndicate!" The auctioneer crowed, his gelatinous jowls quivering with excitement, as a representative, a hulking Krogan with scarred chrome mandibles, raised a meaty hand. Larson let out a slow, weary breath, the sound lost in the din of the crowd. A wretched collection of smugglers, information brokers, and syndicate enforcers. "Well, Flicker," he muttered under his breath, the name popping into his head unbidden. "Looks like we're doing this the hard way." He drew the heavy-gauge plasma pistol from the holster at the small of his back. Its weight was a familiar comfort. He aimed for the massive jury-rigged industrial lamp dangling by a frayed power conduit directly over the stage. The crack of the shot was a thunderclap in the enclosed space. The lamp exploded in a shower of sparks and shattered plasteel, plunging the stage and the first few rows of bidders into darkness and chaos. Shouts of outrage and confusion erupted from the assembled scum of the Sump. Larson used the moment, vaulting over a table laden with illicit cybernetics and landing in a crouch. A hulking, thick-hided brute with tusks jutting from its lower jaw turned on him, roaring a challenge, and Larson didn't hesitate. He slammed the butt of his pistol into the merc's temple, feeling the cartilage crunch. He spun on his heel, his worn boot kicking a smaller, weasel-faced bidder into the path of another guard, creating a brief, flailing obstacle. He moved through the chaos, a blur of motion and brutal purpose. He had no formal training, no elegant martial art to guide him. He was a brawler, a survivor of 100 desperate scuffles in the grimy underbelly of the galaxy. He used elbows and knees and whatever came to hand. He grabbed a bottle of something potent and green off a tray, smashed it over the helmet of a primordial jackal enforcer, and shoved the jagged neck into the face of another, who was drawing a bead on him. The man screamed and dropped his weapon, clutching at his ruined optical sensors. He reached the darkened stage, the whimpers from the cage guiding him through the gloom. He located the power cell for the bars, a humming, greasy box bolted to the floor. With a grunt of exertion, he ripped it from its housing, tearing wires and metal. The blue field of energy collapsed with a fizzing sound. The little creature, Flicker, scrambled out and immediately latched onto his leg, its claws digging into his synth leather pants with surprising strength. "Right, you're with me," Larson grunted, scooping it up and tucking it inside his jacket. The little creature was warm and vibrating with a terror so profound he could feel it in his own bones. The backup generators sputtered to life, casting the hold in the sickly yellow glow of emergency lighting. He was exposed, dozens of blasters leveled in his direction. "He's got the merchandise!" someone screamed from the back. Larson grinned, a feral, reckless expression that promised violence. "Finders keepers, assholes." He kicked over a fuel canister, aimed a snapshot at the leaking stream of volatile liquid, and dove for cover behind a stack of cargo crates as a wall of fire erupted between him and his pursuers. The screams turned from angry to panicked. Larson didn't stick around to watch the show. He sprinted down a service corridor, flickering a trembling lump against his chest, the sounds of chaos and gunfire fading behind him. He burst out onto a loading platform that overlooked the swirling, greasy clouds of the nebula, stole the nearest cargo speeder, and gunned it into the station's labyrinthian transit tunnels, leaving a trail of furious, disenfranchised criminals in his wake. Back in the cramped, perpetually dim confines of his HAB unit on the station's lower ring, Larson finally let the creature out of his jacket. The air smelled of stale booze, old synth noodles, and weapons solvent. The small space was less of a home and more of a temporary burrow, a place to crash between jobs, littered with spare parts, discarded ration packs, and the ghosts of old contracts. Flicker cautiously hopped onto the floor, its oversized ears swiveling independently, each one a delicate radar dish taking in the unfamiliar sounds of the station's life support humming through the walls. It took a few tentative steps, sniffed at the leg of his battered armchair, its fabric patched with gray industrial sealant, then looked up at him with very large, very adorable eyes. It let out a soft, melodic chirp, a sound like a tiny silver bell. Yeah, you're welcome," Larson grumbled, peeling off his jacket and tossing it onto a pile of laundry that was threatening to achieve sentience. "Now, what the hell are you?" He ran a diagnostic on his wrist comp, extending a low-power scanner toward the creature. Flicker flinched but didn't run. The scanner whirred for a moment, its beam of light playing over the creature's soft fur, then beeped with a frustratingly unhelpful message. "Species unknown. No match in galactic registry." "Great. You're not just a stolen pet, you're an undocumented stolen pet. That makes things so much simpler." He ran a hand through his scruffy dark hair, feeling the grit of the day. "Look, I don't know what I'm going to do with you. Probably drop you on some forgotten garden world where you can, I don't know, chirp at the trees. But for now, you stay put and don't chew on any of the wires. Some of them are explosive." Flicker tilted its head, its ears twitching with an intelligence that seemed far beyond that of a simple animal. It then trotted over and nudged his hand with its furry nose. A wave of unexpected warmth spread through him, a strange, comforting sensation like a shot of good whiskey without the burn. He found himself, against his better judgment, stroking the creature's soft fur. It let out a contented noise, a sound somewhere between a purr and a low hum that seemed to vibrate in the air around them. "Don't get used to this," he warned, though his voice lacked any real bite. "I'm not the soft-touch type." The words were barely out of his mouth when the entire wall of his HAB unit exploded inward in a storm of Durasteel shrapnel and pulverized plaster. A figure stood silhouetted against the blinding light and swirling dust of the corridor, the acrid smell of burnt wiring and superheated metal filling the air. She was tall and slender, clad in what looked like armor made of woven silver silk that seemed to drink the emergency strobes. In her hand, a whip of pure, crackling plasma hissed and spat, casting an ethereal blue glow on her sharp, aristocratic features. On her vambrace, a small holographic display flickered, showing a resonant energy signature that pulsed in time with Flicker's panicked squeaks. "Blasphemer," she said, her voice a low, dangerous command, each syllable clipped and perfect. "You will release the sacred ether lock, and I will grant you a swift death for your desecration." Larson blinked, his hand automatically going for the pistol on his hip. "First off, his name is Flicker. Second, who the hell are you? And third, did you just blow up my door? The deposit on this place is outrageous." Without answering, she moved. She flowed, a liquid dance of death that covered the space between them in an instant. The plasma whip lashed out, not at him, but at the pistol in his hand. The weapon flew from his grasp, clattering across the floor. its casing glowing a dull, angry red from the near miss. Larson reacted on pure instinct, diving sideways, rolling behind his couch. The whip cracked again, the air sizzling, and sliced the piece of furniture in half. Stuffing and frayed circuits spilled onto the floor. "Okay, lady, let's talk about this," he yelled, scrambling for cover behind his kitchen counter, which was little more than a stained metal slab. "There is nothing to discuss," she replied, her voice glacially calm as she advanced, her steps silent and deliberate. "You have laid your profane hands upon a divine being. Your life is forfeit." He popped up, hurling a cast-iron skillet at her head. She deflected it with a casual flick of her whip, the metal slagging in midair and splattering against the wall in a molten mess. Flicker, terrified, scurried from behind Larson's legs and hid under the bed frame in the corner of the small room, a dark shape in the gloom. This woman was on another level. Her movements were too exact, each motion a study in lethal grace. Every strike was perfect. Larson was a brawler who thrived on chaos, but she was a duelist who commanded it. He was utterly outmatched. He made a desperate play, grabbing the half-empty bottle of Corellian whiskey from the counter. "Look, I'll give you the space hamster back. Just calm down." She faltered for a fraction of a second, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Space hamster?" He lunged, not at her but past her, toward his workbench. His hands closed around the familiar grip of a heavy-duty plasma torch. He ignited it with a roar, the jet of white-hot energy, a poor substitute for a proper weapon, but it was better than nothing. He spun to face her, torch held in a defensive stance, the heat from it warming his face. "One more step, and I'll redecorate the hallway with your internal organs." She met his gaze, his eyes like chirps of ice. "Your species barks so loudly before it dies." The standoff was broken by a third, far less elegant intrusion. A section of the opposite wall disintegrated into rubble as a volley of heavy blaster fire ripped through it. 3 figures, in the crimson and black armor of the primordial jackals, stormed in, their own crude scanner beeping wildly as it locked onto Flicker's energy signature. "There he is! Grab the creature!" their leader barked, ignoring Larson and the priestess entirely. Before either of them could react, a jackal tossed a fragmentation grenade into the center of the room. In the sudden, ringing silence before the boom, Larson saw it all. The blinking red light, the crude stenciling on the casing, the way the priestess's eyes widened, her warrior's calm finally breaking. His body moved before his brain caught up. He lunged, tackling her, wrapping his arms around the slender, armored form and twisting so his back was to the blast. The world vanished in a deafening roar and a wave of pure force. White-hot pain erupted across his back as metal shrapnel tore through his jacket and into his flesh. The force of the blast threw them against the far wall, his body cushioning hers completely. The ceiling groaned under the strain, raining down a fresh shower of dust and synthcrete. For a moment, all he could hear was a high-pitched ringing that drowned out the world. He tasted blood, his vision swam. Then he felt her shift beneath him. "Get off me!" she gasped, her voice strained. Larson pushed himself up, his back screaming in protest, every nerve on fire. "You're welcome!" The jackals were advancing, their blasters raised. The priestess was on her feet in an instant, her plasma whip a blur of motion, deflecting a volley of shots that sent superheated bolts careening around the ruined room. The air filled with the smell of scorched metal and superheated coolant. Larson staggered to his pistol, miraculously intact, and fired a 3-shot burst into the chest of the nearest merc. The man crumpled. They were back to back, a cornered mercenary and a furious priestess, against a squad of trained killers in a room that was rapidly falling apart. "I have a plan," Larson grunted, firing again, his ears still ringing. "Does it involve more blasphemy and destruction?" she shot back, her whip taking the legs out from under another jackal. "Mostly destruction," he admitted. "Follow my lead." He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the gaping hole where his front door used to be. They spilled out into the corridor, blaster fire chewing up the wall behind them. He didn't run for the lifts. He ran for the emergency maintenance hatch at the end of the hall. Flicker scrambling out from under the bed to follow them, chirping in distress. Larson kicked the hatch open and plunged into the darkness of the station's service conduits. The air was thick with the reek of stagnant water and overworked machinery, his boots clanging on the grated floor. The priestess followed without hesitation. They fought their way through the guts of the station, a desperate running battle in the dark, and finally emerged in a deserted sub-level hangar. Larson's ship, an old, heavily modified freighter called the Vagrant, sat waiting. He slammed his palm on the ramp control, and it lowered with a hydraulic hiss. "Get Flicker! Get on board!" he yelled, laying down covering fire as the survival jackal spilled out into the hangar. The priestess scooped up the trembling creature and sprinted up the ramp. Larson emptied his clip, then turned and ran, diving through the closing entryway just as a volley of plasma bolts seared the metal where he'd been standing. The ship rocked as he sealed the door and sprinted for the cockpit, the adrenaline-fueled symphony of a chaotic escape roaring in his ears. Aboard the cramped, cluttered bridge of the Vagrant, the truce was as fragile as a spider's web in a hurricane. The woman stood with her arms crossed, her expression a thunderous mask of restrained fury. Flicker was curled up on the co-pilot's chair, occasionally letting out a worried chirp. "Let me be clear, human," she said, her voice dangerously low. "You did not rescue the sacred ether lark. You prolonged its desecration at the hands of a heretic." Larson was slumped in the pilot's seat, running a diagnostic on the ship's patched-together systems. He winced as a jolt of pain shot up his spine from the shrapnel wounds. "Look, Your Holiness, or whatever you are, I saw a scared animal in a cage. I got it out. End of story. I didn't know it was your deity." He keyed in the coordinates for a quiet, out-of-the-way asteroid belt where they could lay low. "So I didn't just steal a pet. I stole your space pope Jesus hamster." His eyes narrowed. "Do you find blasphemy amusing?" "I find this whole situation amusing," he retorted, leaning back and trying to ignore the fire in his back. "One minute, I'm planning a quiet night of cheap whiskey and bad holovids. The next, I'm being shot at by a crime syndicate and a warrior nun for liberating a fluffy potato." "I am Leatrix Weiss, High Priestess of the Athelian Concord," she stated, as if that explained everything. "And that fluffy potato is the heart of our civilization. The ether lark generates a psychic field of harmony, a resonance that ensures peace and prosperity for my people. Its recent disappearance caused that field to weaken. Our society is fracturing. Paranoia and dissent are spreading like a plague. You haven't just stolen an animal, Larson Mandel. You've stolen the soul of an empire." Larson stared at her, then at Flicker, then back at her. The sarcastic retort on his tongue died. He'd seen empires crumble, not exactly a pretty sight. He was in so much more trouble than he'd thought, not just from a few mercs, but from anyone with a scanner sensitive enough to pick up the ether lark's unique energy signature. In this part of the galaxy, that was just about everyone with a ship and a grudge. "So, you tracked him using that gizmo on your arm?" he asked, nodding toward her vambrace. "The Vysians are attuned to the ether lark's resonance. My vestments merely amplify my ability to pinpoint its location," she explained stiffly. "A crude blessing given the company I now find myself in." "Yeah, well, the feeling's mutual," he muttered, throttling up the engines. The Vagrant lurched into FTL, the starfield outside the cockpit stretching into streaks of blue and white light. They were safe, for now, but they were trapped together in a metal can, hurtling through the blackness with the most wanted creature in the galaxy. The escape had not been clean. A stray plasma bolt had started a brief, intense fire in the corridor leading to the medbay. Leatrix had put it out with a localized extinguisher, but not before a piece of superheated plating had seared her upper arm through her silver armor. Later, in the dim antiseptic light of the small medbay, Larson found her trying to treat the wound herself, her movements stiff with pain. "Here," he said, his voice softer than she'd heard it before. He took the dermal regenerator from her hand. "Let me. You'll just make it worse." She hesitated, her pride warring with the throbbing pain in her arm. Finally, she gave a curt nod and sat on the edge of the biobed. Larson gently pushed the sleeve of her armor up, revealing a nasty, blistered burn against her pale skin. "This is gonna sting," he warned. He cleaned the wound with an antiseptic wipe. His calloused, scarred hands, which she'd only seen used for violence, worked with a focused calm. He was surprisingly gentle. The air in the tiny room was thick with unspoken things. The adrenaline of the fight, the shared danger, the raw, undeniable physical awareness of each other. As he applied the soothing balm from the medkit, Flicker trotted into the room. The little creature hopped onto the bed beside Leatrix, nudged her uninjured hand with its head, and began to emit a soft, low purr. A wave of calm washed over her, easing the tension in her shoulders and the fire in her arm. She watched him work, his brow furrowed in concentration. She saw the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the dried blood matting in his hair. She remembered the feeling of his body shielding hers from the grenade blast, the solid, unyielding weight of him taking the pain that was meant for her. He carefully placed the used supplies on a tray, his movements careful and exact. A flicker of genuine concern crossed his face as he checked his work, before his usual sarcastic mask slid back into place. That small, unguarded moment struck her more than the violence had. He finished dressing the wound, his fingers brushing against her skin. A jolt like static electricity passed between them. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the ship's engines was the only sound. "Thanks," she finally managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. He just grunted, clearing his throat and stepping back, breaking the spell. "Don't get shot next time. I'm running low on bandages." He turned and walked out, leaving her alone with Flicker and the lingering warmth of his touch on her arm. The crude, blaspheming thief she intended to kill was being steadily replaced by a man far more complex and far more dangerous to her composure. They needed intel. The primordial jackals were just hired muscle. Someone else was pulling the strings, someone with the resources to find and abduct a creature that was, for all intents and purposes, a myth to the rest of the galaxy. "I know a guy," Larson said, hunched over the nav computer. "An information broker on Port Nocturne. Calls himself Quill. He deals in secrets the way other people deal in spice. If anyone knows who put the bounty on Flicker, it's him." "Port Nocturne is a cesspool," Leatrix stated, her distaste evident. "A monument to decades and corruption." "It's also the best place to get lost in a crowd," Larson countered. "Quill operates out of a place called the Penumbra Lounge. High security, high-class clientele. We can't go in looking like a beat-up merc and a space nun with a laser whip." The plan was simple, and Leatrix hated it. They would have to blend in. An hour later, they were planetside, the neon-drenched, rain-slicked streets of Port Nocturne a stark contrast to the sterile corridors of the Athelian Temple. Larson had traded his battered gear for a sleek black jacket and dark trousers that fit him in a way that was both casual and dangerously flattering. Leatrix, after much protest, was wearing a form-fitting midnight blue dress Larson had pulled from a contingency locker. It left one shoulder bare, revealing the stark white of her bandage, and clung to her athletic frame in a way that made Larson's mouth go dry. "We're supposed to be a couple," Larson said, his voice a low grumble as they approached the club's entrance. "Wealthy off-worlders on a little romantic getaway, so try to look like you don't want to kill me." "A difficult task," she replied, her tone clipped, but she looped her arm through his. The contact set another jolt through him. Inside the Penumbra Lounge was a symphony of sensory overload. Holographic dancers shimmered in the air. The bass of the music vibrated through the floor, and aliens of 100 different species mingled, their jewels and cybernetics glinting in the strobing lights. They found Quill in a private booth, overlooking the main floor. He was a thin, nervous man with 3 sets of eyes that darted around constantly, each pair tracking a different part of the room. "Mandel," Quill said, not looking pleased. "I heard you caused a stir over in the sump, made some powerful enemies." "I'm a people person," Larson said dryly, sliding into the booth. Leatrix sat beside him, her posture rigid. "I need a name, Quill. Who wants a little Viserian creature, no questions asked, no disintegrations?" Quill's eyes widened. "You have it? The Ether Ark? The bounty is unprecedented. Warlord Zafar himself put it out." The name landed in the booth like a grenade. Zafar was a butcher, a monster who carved out his territory in the Outer Rim with scorched earth tactics and unimaginable cruelty. "What does Zafar want with a living god?" Leatrix asked, her voice tight. Quill leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He's not a collector. Rumor is his fleet is massing near the Athelian border. He's planning a surprise attack." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Larson looked at Leatrix, seeing the dawning horror in her eyes mirror his own. "He's not collecting a pet," Larson said, the words feeling like ice in his gut. Leatrix finished the thought, her voice trembling with profound rage. "He means to break our spirit before his ships even arrive. He's going to kill our god." Their cover was blown the moment they left the booth. A squad of Zafar's elite shock troops, tipped off by Quill, were waiting for them. The club erupted into a firefight. Larson and Leatrix moved as one, their earlier fight in the HAB unit a clumsy rehearsal for this deadly ballet. They fought their way out of the club and into the rain-soaked streets, a frantic speeder chase tearing through the neon canyons of Port Nocturne. They made it back to the Vagrant by the skin of their teeth, the ship's hull plating scarred by enemy fire. Zafar's agents were relentless. A squadron of sleek, black interceptors ambushed them as they left the Port Nocturne system, forcing them into a dense, treacherous asteroid field. "Hold on!" Larson yelled, yanking the controls hard to port. The Vagrant groaned in protest as it lodged a massive chunk of spinning rock. He pushed the old freighter to its limits, weaving through the debris with a reckless, intuitive genius. He was dancing with chaos, using the asteroids as both shield and weapon. "Rear shields are failing!" Leatrix's voice was calm and steady from the gunner's seat, a stark contrast to the violent maneuvers shaking the ship. "I have a firing solution on the lead fighter. Take it!" A moment later, the ship shuddered as the dorsal cannons unleashed a volley of plasma. A blossom of orange and white light bloomed in the rearview mirror. "Target destroyed," she reported, her voice as cool as if she were ordering tea. "Acquiring next target." They were a perfect team, his chaos and her exactitude, his reckless improvisation and her unwavering focus. Together, they were more than the sum of their parts. They were unstoppable. They limped out of the asteroid field hours later, battered and bruised, but not alone. Zafar's ambush had failed. Later that rotation, sleep wouldn't come. The ship was a wreck, the adrenaline had worn off, and every one of Larson's muscles ached. He found Flicker in the cockpit, sitting on the console, looking out at the endless river of stars. The creature chirped softly as he approached. Larson sank into the pilot's seat, the sarcastic armor he wore like a second skin finally gone. He reached out and gently stroked Flicker's fur. "You have no idea what a mess you've gotten me into, do you, Flicker?" he murmured, his voice rough with exhaustion. The creature just purred, leaning into his touch. "But I'm glad I was there." It was a quiet confession, spoken only to a tiny alien and the silent emptiness. Perhaps the truest words he'd said in years. He was no longer just protecting a creature he'd stolen on a whim. He was protecting Flicker. And by extension, he was protecting the fierce, proud, and infuriatingly captivating woman who had dedicated her life to it. His motivations had changed. Survival and credits were no longer enough. The asteroid field had done more damage than he'd initially thought. A micro-fracture in the cargo bay hull had widened into a full-blown breach. The ship's emergency systems had sealed the area, but the outer hull needed to be patched manually, in zero-G. "It has to be both of us," Larson explained, checking the seals on his environment suit. "One to hold the patch in place, one to weld it from the outside." "I understand," Leatrix said, her voice tight over the comms as she secured her own helmet. Tethered together for safety, they exited the airlock into the silent, beautiful, and terrifying blackness. The wreckage of the cargo bay was a twisted mess of metal. Starlight streamed through the breach, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the vacuum. The work was tense and difficult. Fear was a cold knot in Larson's stomach. One wrong move, one slip, and they'd be lost to the infinite dark. He could feel Leatrix's anxiety through the tether connecting them, a faint, nervous vibration. Flicker, watching them from the safety of the cockpit port, must have sensed it too. The creature pressed its face against the transparasteel and let out a low, calming thrum. It wasn't a sound that traveled through the vacuum, but an energy, a focused projection of the harmony field that Leatrix had described. It washed over them, a gentle wave that pushed back the sharp edges of their fear. The anxiety subsided, replaced by an overwhelming awareness of each other. They were two small, fragile beings in an immense, indifferent universe, connected by a single lifeline. They drifted closer, the magnetic clamps on their boots holding them to the hull. Larson finished the final weld and turned to face her. Her face was visible through her helmet's visor, her eyes wide and luminous in the starlight. The raw emotion there, the fear and relief, and something deeper, mirrored his own. The universe fell away. There was only her. He reached out, his gloved hand touching her helmet. She leaned into the touch. They drifted together, until their helmets gently bumped. And then, in the silence of space, surrounded by the wreckage of their escape and the light of 1 billion distant suns, he angled his head, and their lips met through the transparasteel. The kiss was a promise, a declaration made in the vast emptiness, fierce and weightless and absolute. They couldn't outrun Zafar's fleet forever. They were bleeding resources, and the Vagrant was on its last legs. "There's only one place we can go," Leatrix said, her voice grim as they studied the star chart. She pointed to a star system deep within the Athelian Concord's territory. "Ethel, my home. The Grand Temple is a fortress." "You said your people were in chaos," Larson countered, "that the military is fractured. But what good is a fortress without a loyal army?" "The Athelian military command is paralyzed by a political infighting, yes. I cannot trust the admirals," she explained, a fire entering her eyes. "But the Temple Guard is a separate force. They are not soldiers of the state. They are sworn protectors of the Etherlark. Their loyalty is to their god, and to me, its high priestess. The temple is the only place I can find an army I can trust to launch a counter-assault." The plan was a desperate long shot, but it was the only one they had. They arrived at Ethel to find the heavens already burning. Zafar's vanguard fleet had punched through the disorganized planetary defenses and was laying siege to the Grand Temple, a magnificent structure of white stone and soaring spires that now shuddered under orbital bombardment. They slipped through the blockade in the battered Vagrant and landed in a hidden hangar. The temple guards, clad in ornate silver armor and wielding plasma halberds, fought with the disciplined but predictable tactics of warriors who had known only peace for centuries. They were being slaughtered. Larson took one look at the crumbling battle lines and his mercenary instincts took over. "Your men are fighting like they're in a parade," he snarled at Leatrix as they raced through a cloister, explosions shaking the ancient stones. "They're holding a line. Zafar's mercs don't fight in lines. They flank, they suppress, they overwhelm." He horrified her by turning the sacred spaces of her home into kill zones. He kicked over a priceless 1,000-year-old statue of a revered saint to create better cover. "Beauty doesn't stop bullets," he barked when she cried out in protest. He ordered a squad of guards to rig a priceless, articulated chandelier with explosives, turning it into a deadly trap for an advancing platoon of shock troopers. He was a force of profane, chaotic nature, unleashed in her pristine, ordered world, and he was brutally, undeniably effective. His unconventional defenses, his ambushes in meditation gardens and choke points in scripture halls, shattered the enemy's arrangements. The temple guards, initially scandalized, began to follow his snarled commands with grim effectiveness. Leatrix watched him, a whirlwind of tactical brilliance and sacrilege, and she understood. This was his strength. This was the strength her people had forgotten. The grit, the adaptability, the sheer bloody-minded refusal to die that was so quintessentially human. He had a form of strength her ordered world desperately needed. They beat back the first wave, but they knew the main assault was coming. On the eve of what was likely a suicide mission, they planned their final, insane gambit. "We can't win a defensive war," Larson said, pointing at a display showing Zafar's fleet. "We have to cut the head off the snake. We have to get to Zafar." "Board the Desolator? That's suicide," a temple guard captain protested. "Staying here is suicide," Larson shot back. "It's just slower." He zoomed in on the temple's lower levels. "Zafar's dropping reinforcements at Landing Bay Gamma every 2 hours. A patrol shuttle. We hit the next one hard. We take their ride, their uniforms, and their command codes. It's our only way up there." The ambush was short, brutal, and ruthlessly effective. Larson and Leatrix, leading a small strike team of the temple's best fighters, hit the disembarking shock troopers from 2 sides. The fight in the enclosed bay was a maelstrom of plasma fire and close-quarters combat. Larson disabled the last trooper, ripping the command data pad from his belt, and tossed it to Leatrix. "Get the codes! We've got 90 seconds before they miss their check-in." With the stolen shuttle secured, Leatrix performed one last official act. From a secure communication terminal, she sent a single, heavily encrypted message to Admiral Taggart, a man she knew was a fierce loyalist. "Admiral Taggart has been suspicious of Zafar's ambitions for months," she explained to Larson, her fingers darting across the holographic interface. "He moved the Third Fleet to the Gorgon Nebula last week under the guise of training exercises. He's only one FTL jump from here, but he can't act without proof of treason, or he'll trigger a civil war." She finished the message and sent it. "The Ether Lark is alive. Zafar is the traitor. We take the fight to the Desolator. I entrust our people to your honor. Await chaos as our signal." "This is the political cover he needs," she said, turning to Larson, her face grim but resolute. "It's the spark that lights the fire." Later, she found Larson in a shattered observatory at the top of the highest spire. The dome had been blown open, offering a clear, heartbreaking view of the stars and the dark shapes of Zafar's fleet hanging in orbit. The weight of what was to come, the near certainty of their deaths, hung between them in the cold night air. Words were useless. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and that was all it took. She crossed the rubble-strewn floor and crashed into him. The embrace was raw and desperate and hungry, a fierce, passionate affirmation of life in the face of annihilation. They shed their armor and their clothes on the cold stone floor, under the silent watch of the uncaring stars, and made love with a desperation that bordered on violence, 2 souls clinging to each other at the end of the world. Using the captured enemy shuttle and its stolen command codes, they slipped through the orbital blockade and docked with the Desolator. A red river of violence followed. They fought their way through deck after deck of armored soldiers, a perfect storm of human ferocity and Vysian grace. Larson was a whirlwind of plasma bolts and brutal purpose, using every dirty trick he knew. Leatrix was a dancer of death, her whip a singing, incandescent blur, but her ceremonial plasma blade a tool of lethal exactitude. They moved together, anticipated each other's actions, and covered each other's backs without a word. A simple, two-headed engine of destruction, cutting a path toward the heart of the beast. They blew the reinforced doors to the bridge and stormed in. The scene was exactly as they feared. Warlord Zafar, a mountain of a man in black power-assisted armor, stood on the command dais. In one massive gauntlet, he held a whimpering, terrified Flicker. In the other, he held a gleaming vibroblade to the little creature's throat. A massive holographic screen behind him showed a live broadcast being beamed across the galaxy. A countdown timer in the corner ticking towards 0. "Priestess Vice," Zafar boomed, his voice a synthesized growl, "and her human pet. You're just in time to watch your empire's faith die." "Let him go, Zafar," Leatrice yelled, her voice ringing with authority. Larson didn't waste time talking. He opened fire. The bridge exploded into a focused storm of violence. While Larson engaged the armored warlord, Leatrix held off Zafar's elite bridge guard. The fight was brutal. Larson was all speed and agility against Zafar's raw power, dodging crushing blows that dented the deck plating where he'd stood moments before. "Your chaotic spirit is amusing, human, but it cannot defeat pure power," Zafar roared, swatting Larson aside. Larson rolled, coming up firing. He knew he couldn't punch through the main armor. He targeted the joints. He slid under a sweeping blow, came up close, and fired his plasma pistol at point-blank range into the servo mechanism of Zafar's left knee. The armor held, but the localized heat caused the joint to glow cherry red and hiss. Zafar laughed, kicking him away. "A gnat's bite." Just as Zafar raised his blade to finally skewer the mercenary, the entire ship shuddered violently. Red alert klaxons blared. On the main view screen, a fleet of Athelian Concord warships dropped out of the FTL, their spinal cannons glowing with energy. Admiral Taggart had received his signal. The distraction was all Larson needed. As Zafar's head snapped toward the view screen in disbelief, Larson lunged. He didn't go for a killing blow. He went for the damaged knee. He slammed his combat knife into the superheated joint, using the blade not to cut, but to pry. With a screech of tortured metal, the weakened armor plate popped open. He twisted the knife, severing the now exposed power conduits within. The warlord roared in pain and fury as his leg seized up. He stumbled, his grip on Flicker loosening for a fraction of a second. Larson launched himself off a console, slamming his full body weight into Zafar's chest. The warlord, off balance and surprised, toppled backward with a crash of metal on durasteel. Flicker was thrown clear. Leatrix, having dispatched the last of the guards, scooped up the sacred etherlark. She ran to the broadcast camera, which was still live, and held Flicker up for the entire galaxy to see. Across the Athelian Concord, on 1,000,000 screens, the image appeared. Their god, alive and safe, protected by their high priestess. A belief, which had been flickering and dying, roared back to life like a supernova. On the bridge of the burning flagship, with the sounds of a naval battle raging outside, Larson pushed himself to his feet, bruised, bleeding, and grinning from ear to ear. Zafar lay groaning on the ground, his power armor sparking and dead. Leatrix rushed to Larson, her eyes shining with tears and triumph. She threw her arms around his neck and pulled him into a victorious, desperate kiss, pouring all her love, gratitude, and her relief into it. At their feet, Flicker let out a happy, chirping squeak, finally safe in the arms of two people who had torn a path through the galaxy for him. a blaspheming human and a warrior princess, an unlikely pair who had found their faith not in ancient temples, but in each other.